Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board, and welcome to the July 15th special board meeting. And before we begin this morning, I'll turn the meeting over to Teresa Impastato, our Chief Safety Officer, for this morning's contact. Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Summertime means long days, sunshine, picnics, and barbecues. The American Cancer Society offers these tips to make the most of your summer and stay healthy too. Most skin cancers are caused by too much exposure to ultraviolet or UV rays from the sun and man-made sources like tanning booths. Protect your skin from the sun when you go outside, especially during long, warm summer days, by covering up. While out in the sun, wear clothing and a wide-brimmed hat to protect as much skin as possible. Protect your eyes with sunglasses that block at least 99% of UV light. Use a broad spectrum sunscreen with a sun protection factor or SPF of at least 30. Put more on at least every 2 hours and after swimming or sweating. Seek shade, limiting your direct exposure to the sun, especially between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. when UV rays are strongest. Avoid tanning beds and sun lamps, as both can cause serious long-term skin damage and contribute to skin cancer. Lastly, be sure to have your skin checked annually by your doctor. For more information, visit www.cancer.org. That concludes our safety contact.
Thank you, Teresa. And good morning again. You may notice that we have a new director joining us this morning, Mr. Don Drummond, Colonel Drummond. Our corporate secretary swore him in earlier this week to begin onboarding so he could participate in this morning's executive session. But we will now have the honor of formally and publicly swearing him in shortly. Ms. Ellison, but before we do that, Ms. Ellison, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Chair Smedberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Babers?
Present.
Vice Chair Slater?
Present.
Director McMillan?
Here.
Director Letourneau?
Present.
Alternate Director Bulger?
Present.
Director Drummer?
Present.
Alternate Director Routh. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. First, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented with one change: to defer the Riders Advisory Council appointment until our regularly scheduled meeting on July 29th. Are there any objections to that change? Hearing none, I'll accept the agenda as approved or as amended, approved as amended. Mr. Drummer, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
How are you? Nice seeing you.
Thank you.
Mr. Drummer will be the new Principal Director from Maryland. He is a scholar or a solar energy entrepreneur, a retired senior executive in the federal government, and a retired U.S. Army colonel. Mr. Drummer concluded his federal career in the Federal Aviation Administration while serving as Director of Aviation Logistics Organizations in Washington, D.C. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Drummer served in the Transportation Security Administration for almost 6 years. Preceding his assignment to the TSA headquarters, he served in frontline national security operations as Deputy Federal Security Director at the John F. Kennedy International Airport and as Acting Federal Security Director at Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport, and as Federal Security Director at Newark Liberty International Airport. Prior to joining TSA, Mr. Drummer completed 30 years of active duty service in the U.S. Army. He holds a Bachelor's of Business Administration from the University of Texas at Austin, a Master's of Business Administration from Kansas State University, and a Master's of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. We welcome your experience and your leadership. Now, Don, would you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Donald Drummer.
I, Donald Drummer.
Do hereby solemnly swear.
Do hereby solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution and laws of the state of Maryland.
and the Constitution and laws of the state of Maryland,
from which I was appointed as a principal director
from which I was appointed as a principal director
of the board of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the board of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office upon which I'm about to enter.
of the office upon which I'm about to enter.
Mr. Drummer, on behalf of the board, I'd like to welcome you to the Metro Board. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting experience for you, and we look forward to working with you and, again, the expertise that you bring to the table. Don, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really honored by this opportunity to again serve our communities. I'm humbled by the challenges ahead of us, and my commitment to you is that I'll seek to add value to our team.
It's great to hear. Secretary Slater, would you like to say anything?
Just wanted to congratulate Colonel Drummer and really thank him for his willingness to serve and stress how important this is for the state of Maryland and the regional success. And we're lucky to have him.
Great. All right, again, welcome. Next, we'll move on to revised committee assignments. Now I'd like to move approval of revised committee assignments, specifically to add Director Drummer and alternate Director Bolger to the Safety and Operations Committee. Mr. Bolger will be an interim member until a new principal member from the District of Columbia is appointed. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Director McMillan,
Aye.
Director Letourneau,
Aye.
Alternate Director Bolger,
Aye.
Director Drummer,
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse. Mr.
Aye.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Next, we have two administrative actions before us this morning. First, we'll address the Accessibility Advisory Committee appointments. There are currently 3 vacancies on the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and 7 members' terms have expired. Therefore, I would like to move the following appointments and reappointments. Reappointing Stephen Cafin and Philippa Mazzilli, and appointing Lucius Thomas Magrum, representing the District of Columbia, reappointing Tino Calabria and Paul Simmelfort, representing the state of Maryland, and appointing Marcy Goldberg and reappointing Anthony Oberg, Philip Posner, and Kelly Simonu, representing the Commonwealth of Virginia, and appointing Deborah Fisher, representing the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Access for All Committee. I'd like to move approval of this slate. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Director McMillan,
Aye.
Director Letourneau,
Aye.
Alternate Director Bolger,
Aye.
Director Drummer,
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Next, the board is being asked to revise the start date for the promotional pass period, which was approved last month. Changing the start date to or on or about September 15th will allow for the concurrent marketing and implementation of the promotion access across all passes. We're excited to welcome our riders back with this promotion and want to make sure everything goes smoothly for their return. I'd like to move approval. Can I get a second before we move to discussion?
Second.
Seconded by Deputy Mayor Babers. Okay. Are there any discussions or questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom.
Yes,
could you-
Mr. Bolger. Yep.
All right, since I've been in the bullpen, can you explain what we're doing here?
Ms. Bowersock, are you on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolger, basically we are changing the date that the discounted pass products will be offered to the public so that the sales can be promoted and begun in September. And then the 30-day pass, discounted pass, will be available to our customers in October. Doing so allows us to communicate more simply the discounted fare options that the board approved in order to encourage riders to return to the system this fall.
Mr. Chairman, could you,
Yes.
Lynn, could you explain the financial implications of this change, notwithstanding the timing? What's the financial implications?
I don't believe, Mr. Bolger, that there are any financial implications to the budget, if that's the question.
No, the question is, what are the fare implication financials?
Mr. Bolger, I think the board was viewing this more in the effect of trying to provide some incentives to get ridership back. So I'm not really sure. You know, that's what Ms. Bowerstock just said. I don't think there really is any. I mean, there's no financial cost really to implement this. I mean, there's some changes that need to take place, you know, on the back end, on, you know, the operational side, but beyond that, it's really just a incentive to have people who were taking transit or who might be new riders to transit, you know, back into the system after being away for what, 14, 15 months now, and really trying to incentivize folks to come back to transit. As we know, Secretary Slater, Secretary Ballantyne, Mayor Bowser and her team are really wanting to support transit and make sure that people get back on public transit, whether it be rail or bus. And, you know, we don't want people getting back in their cars if need be. And, you know, this is one way we thought that would be, you know, a good thing to do, particularly people, you know, and encourage them to, you know, to buy the passes.
Okay, I still don't understand. How much is a 30-day pass worth? What's the cost of that?
So it will depend on your origin and destination.
I still don't understand how I explain this to people, but go ahead, Mr. Chairman, fine.
Okay, thank you, Tom. All right, are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I
Yes,
just was going to point
please.
out for Tom's benefit, we did have a much more extensive discussion about this and other options at prior board meetings before we did it. And what we're essentially doing is taking the fare products and just simply providing a discount to it from the normal price as a way to allow us to have something else to market to try to get people back on. So when we did that, though, what we didn't take into consideration was just the timing of other factors, which is leading us to this adjustment today. So today's action is just a small adjustment in the timing of when this thing starts so that it can run concurrently with our other programs. But the main discussion about this product came previously. It's this just for background.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, and Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Director McMillan,
Aye.
Director Letourneau,
Aye.
Alternate Director Bolger,
Present.
Director Drummer,
Aye.
Alternate Director Routh.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. With no further business to come before the board, we will stand adjourned and we will move to the executive committee meeting. Thank you, everyone, and Colonel Drummer, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Executive Committee of the WMATA Board. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider, are there any objections to the agenda as presented? If there are none, we'll consider the agenda approved. Next, we'll move to the approval of the minutes. Now we have approval of minutes. We have the minutes of our June 10th, 2021 meeting and executive sessions of June 10th, 2021 and June 24th, 2021 before us for approval. Are there any objections or comments, corrections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved. Our action item today is acceptance of an OIG report. Under the board's bylaws, the executive committee has the responsibility of reviewing and accepting audits and other reports by the inspector general. The committee has reviewed the following report: management assistant report, review of WMATA's improper payments. Before we take a vote, I'd like to ask our IG, Mr. Charrington, to provide the committee with any highlights from the report. Mr. Charrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. To WMATA's credit, they have established disbursement controls to prevent improper payments. They have not, however, established a comprehensive improper payment program. They've not identified transactions susceptible to improper payments, designed controls to prevent, detect, and reduce improper payments, or reported improper payment metrics to leadership. WMATA is a steward of significant public resources. A comprehensive program would ensure that WMATA has a defined proactive process to safeguard against future improper payments and a system to recover funds when improper payments occur. WMATA has agreed to all of our recommendations and agreed to implement a more comprehensive improper payment program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Charrington. Do any of the, well, first we'll turn to the committee members. Do any of the committee members have a question or any comments for the IG? Okay, hearing none. Other board members, any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to move approval of the item. Is there a second from a committee member?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McMillan. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Mr. McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. This report has been accepted and the Inspector General has been authorized to post it online. Since there is no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. Now we will begin the Safety and Operations Committee meeting, and now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Letourneau to get that started in just a moment.
Okay, are we ready to go?
Yes.
Great. Good morning and welcome to today's Safety and Operation Committee. Thank you for joining us. I just want to say at the top once again that I appreciate my colleagues selecting me to chair the committee, and I'll certainly give it my best effort. We have today's agenda before us. If there are no objections to the agenda, I'd like to consider the agenda as presented. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. We also have the minutes from our last meeting before us for approval. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to review those minutes from our June 10th meeting. Unless there are objections, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Are there objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We have one action item and two informational items on today's agenda. The first item, Chief Pavlik of our Transit Police Department will review a proposal to update the tariff to allow Metro to temporarily suspend customers who engage in sex or sex-related crimes or crimes involving a firearm or a dangerous weapon on Metro property. Next, we'll have a quick review of the milestones involved in opening phase 2 of Silver Line for passenger service. There's been some issues in the news recently that I want to make sure that we address in our committee meeting today, just for the knowledge of the board and the public. And finally, staff will be providing an update on Metro's progress in implementing its safety management system. So we'll move over to our first item, which is the action item, and I will turn the floor over to Chief Pavlik for the discussion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld.
Yes.
If I may, before the chief begins
Certainly.
his presentation, just a few comments on this item. As we come out of the pandemic, it's very important that we keep the focus on the safety and security of our customers and our employees. And this is an effort to do that. Obviously, we've been doing quite a bit in terms of the virus, whether it's the air filtration systems, the cleaning, the mask wearing, and everything we've done to protect our employees and the customers. But we also have to recognize that there are other issues that people feel unsafe and their security threatened. So that's really what's behind this. So thank you for considering it. And I'll now turn it to the chief to provide more of the details. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Apologize for those technical difficulties. So I want to explain what we currently do, and this applies in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So currently, when an officer observes an individual commit one of these offenses, whether sexual-related offense or crime involving a weapon, the subject is currently placed under arrest. For sexual-related offenses, typically in all three of the jurisdictions, the individual is released the same day or shortly thereafter being arrested. There is a nuances here in the District of Columbia. If the individual is arrested later in the day, he or she may spend the night if they don't make citation release and release the following morning. One of the concerns here, and we really have seen this, is our increase since the pandemic, and particularly the number of repeat offenders that we're starting to see. Next slide, please. So the banning process or suspension process or barring process isn't new to the transit industry. Prior to proposing this to the board for consideration, we did reach out and see what other transit properties are doing across the United States. When we did model the WMATA policy here, we did model it after MARTA. MARTA had a very good policy and a pretty extensive policy. The only thing we did not pick up from MARTA was the fine portion. We believe the fine was something, we currently do not collect fines as an organization, and administering that would be challenging. So that's pretty much the only standard or difference we did to the MARTA policy to our policy. But we felt that MARTA policy was the most sound policy at the jurisdictions or the other transit properties that we compared it to. Next slide, please. So currently what I'm asking the board to consider today is to amend the tariff. Again, for any offense, it's a sexual-related offense, crime that's committed, or any offense involving a deadly weapon or a firearm. If this individual commits this crime the first offense would be a 14-day suspension. When that officer arrests them for the initial charge of the sex crime or the firearm charge or weapon charge, they would also give them a citation that has their information on it, and that explains to them that they are barred or banned from using the Metrobus or Metro Rail system for the next 14 days. On the back of that citation will be the appeals process, which I'll talk about in a minute. If they commit a second offense of a sexual-related offense or firearm or crime involving a weapon, they're then suspended for a 30-day time frame. And then if they commit a third subsequent sexual-related offense or firearm offense, they're suspended for a period of 1 year. And that's during a 12-month rolling period. Next slide, please. So the appeal process is pretty clear. It's explained again on the back of the citation that we will develop. They have 5 days to write an appeal to WMATA. That appeal would be handled by outside counsel, and then that appeal would be answered within 15 days. The appeal decision is final, and we would not refund any funds they may have lost during that appeal process or during that appeal suspension period where they were arrested for the fine itself, the offense itself. Next slide. So here is absent consistent criminal and or civil laws in the District of Columbia, Maryland, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Protect the safety and security of our passengers and employees and our assets. Staff seeks board approval to amend the passenger conduct rules and the WMATA tariff on ridership rules and guidelines. Mr. Letourneau, that concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief Pavlik. Before we ask for questions and input, I will ask for a motion to be placed on the table for this item. Is there a motion to approve the tariff recommendations from a member of the committee?
So moved. Devin here.
Moved by Mr. Rouse. Is there a second? I'll second. Motion's made and seconded. If you want to use the hand raise function on your teams, or just speak up if you can't do that. We will, Mr. Balger, lead us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I'm not aware of all of this, how do we enforce these rules about riding on the buses or the trains, Chief? How's that enforced?
Yeah, so basically, sir, Metro Transit police officers wouldn't go looking for these individuals once they're served. What would happen is if that individual conducts themselves in such a way that's going to draw the police attention, they commit another criminal offense, that officer would stop that individual for that offense that they are committing. And then once their name is queried, it would come up that this individual was banned, barred, suspended from the system and the date that suspension started.
Okay, so let me, Mr. Chairman, let me just, so I get a 2-week suspension and I try to get on a train. What happens if I'm banned?
Theoretically, sir, you could get on the train. And again, as long as you didn't commit a criminal offense that drew your attention to the police, then you could get on that train and we would not be aware of it.
So I could get through the fare gates without any problem and get on a train even though I'm banned?
Yes, sir. We would not suspend, we would not administratively suspend your smart trip card privileges. That's what you're asking.
Seems like a big loophole to me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Chief, do you want to elaborate as to why we wouldn't do that?
Well, not everyone, sir, registered a smart trip card. So administratively, that would be challenging. We did not go into that level of detail as far as going in and trying to suspend someone's smart trip card from working.
So this really exists if somebody commits another offense and gives us sort of another piece to use, try to prevent them from being on the system, right?
Yes, sir. It's simply another tool for police officers to use. The jurisdictional court systems do their best, and we feel as an organization, I feel as the chief of police, I need to do more to protect our employees and our riders. Typically, these individuals who commit these type of offenses are not unfamiliar with the criminal justice system, and they are known to be repeat offenders. So it's another step and another tool that we can take to protect our riders and our employees.
Are there other questions, comments from members of the committee? All right, Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, just one additional clarification, Chief. If a suspended person is encountered, cited on the system during their suspension, would that be considered trespassing or sort of an additional offense and potential sanction in addition to whatever underlying subsequent thing brought them to your officer's attention?
Yes, sir. They would pick up an additional charge, criminal trespass or unlawful entry here in the District of Columbia. But however, it would not bump them up to a second offense as far as the reason for suspension. So if they were suspended for committing a sexual related offense, that 14-day suspension is in effect. And then let's say they committed a new offense, separate and distinct, that's not sexual related or criminally firearm related, their suspension wouldn't be extended. It's only, they would pick up that additional charge of trespassing or unlawful entry.
Okay, thank you. Acknowledging the limitations Mr. Bulger highlighted when you're trying to secure an open system like ours, I think this is a good common sense change, and I applaud you for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? Mr. Rouse.
Yes, thanks. And thank you for that clarification there, Mr. McMillan, because I think that was something we talked about before, is essentially trespassing, and that's the only thing we can enforce with. Question in regard to data that we have. Do we really have a lot of data in respect to this type of repeat offender activity, or is this going to help us start capturing the level or scope of which this is an issue on this system? Is that part of the element here, in that we don't really have a lot of strong data points to point to in terms of making decisions on what suspension should be and whether or not fines are effective?
We do have a lot of data, sir, as far as the number of offenses that are occurring. So The data is showing that the indecent exposure is on the rise. It is increasing when you compare it to the first 6 months of 2020 to the first 6 months of 2021. That's another reason we believe, we're starting to look at the victimology and as well as the suspect's motive. We believe that because there's less people on the trains and on the buses, that this is an opportunity for individuals who commit these crimes because there's less witnesses. There's less opportunity for other individuals to get involved. They may be intimidated because of the number of riders. So as ridership increases, we hope this crime will naturally decrease on its own. But we believe this is just a step in the right direction just to, again, to assure our riders and our employees. 6 months from now, if this is approved by this board, we would at least have a data point to show how many people have suspended or have been suspended during that time frame to see if the program is effective. If a large number is not suspended, then we could draw the premise that the crime is starting to reduce, and then look at obviously how many criminal offenses we are reporting during that 6 month time period.
Yeah, I think that was the core of my question: is the data that we have now, is that just discrete actions versus repeat offenders? And
I apologize. Yeah, no, we have, probably near a dozen that I can think of just off the top of my head of repeat offenders. We had one just this past weekend. The individual committed an indecent act at the Union Station Metro Station. He was arrested early in the morning, about 8:30, 8:45. Several hours later, he was released, and he's at the Anacostia Station that afternoon doing the same offense again. So we know there are repeat offenders. There's individuals that as soon as you say the name, officers know them by name. So that's another group we want to try to really draw down on. The challenge is it is a misdemeanor, and that's why they're released usually the same day because as lewd act as this is and offensive it is to women and other patrons, the system doesn't allow them to hold it for that long period of time because it is a simple misdemeanor.
yeah, and I think that's fair to note too, right? This is a starting point, which is a starting point we need, but it's also going to give us a chance to see what's effective and what's not, because you do have some constraints in terms of what you mentioned about the viability of, issuing fines and things like that. So trying to figure out what's effective is part of life here. And that's something that I think at least we have a starting point to see where we can help reduce these type of activities on the system, because everybody deserves a system that's clean and safe. I think that's essential to transit. One other question for you very quickly, and that's in relation to the suspension and the timing. Did you look into that to see how that would relate in terms of the 14-day suspension versus a 15-day, maximum to process any appeals, and how those two relate?
Yes, sir, we did. Again, I just want to hallmark the MARTA policy, and really comes down to reasonableness. Looking at their policy, look at the National Capital Region, we believe that the policy that we had before you was reasonable. And, 14-day for the first offense, people make mistakes. So, we're going to give people the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, we're obligated to protect the riders and the employees. So we modeled it after MARTA policy, and their policy has been in effect for years, been in conversations with them, and they're seeing good effects down there as well as other transit properties across the United States.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just to follow up on that question though, so just to clarify, so there is a 15-day appeal process, but we are not suspending enforcement of the suspension during appeal, correct?
So no, yeah, that is correct. While they're on suspension, the appeal is part of their suspension. So if it takes 7, 8, 9 days for them to get a response back from the appeal, that's all credited towards their 14-day initial suspension.
Okay. And the other thing that we had discussed previously was just how we landed on sort of this particular time frame, 14-day and so on. To me, it seems frankly a little bit lax, a little lenient. But this is kind of our first foray into this. And so I'm comfortable moving forward with the understanding that if this does prove to be effective, we could potentially look at different penalties down the road once the program is in place. And do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, sir. I think once we have some data, I think a good 6 months of data should help make that next decision. If we need to make a course adjustment, then come back before this board and make that request.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, discussion on this? If not, I will ask Ms. Ellison to call the roll.
Chair Letourneau?
Aye.
Vice Chair Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Bulger?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, our next item, we have two information items. The first one is on Silverline Phase 2 milestones. I think we just wanted to review kind of where we are from the milestone standpoint. This is not the in-depth update that we receive every so often in the committee. Quite frankly, this is being driven more by some recent news reports on the testing recently took place for the integration between Phase 1 and Phase 2, and some questions about the timeline and the ability of the airport's authority to make their Labor Day goal of substantial completion. I believe I'm turning this one over to Mr. Off.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Letourneau, and members of the board. Can you see my slide okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Just one slide, a very brief update. Appreciate the opportunity. So the slide in front of you here is simply a graphical representation of the critical milestones contained in the cooperative agreement between MWA and WMATA that define how the project is transferred from the contractor to MWA and then ultimately to WMATA as the operator and maintainer. I believe you've seen a similar slide, that Laura's presented in the past, but just wanted to use this as a framework to help guide the discussion. So the blue diamonds on the top there just represent specific days in the process: substantial completion, operational readiness date, and revenue operations date. The yellow boxes in between represent the phases between those discrete days. So as Mr. Letourneau mentioned, MWA is moving towards substantial completion, a specific date to be determined. Once MWA declares substantial completion, as defined in their contract, then we will move into operational readiness testing. During that phase, MWA will continue to maintain control and custody of the infrastructure. We sent a letter about a month ago to the board that laid out the litany of testing that's required for both the mainline package A and the yard package B. There is no definitive duration in the cooperative agreement. The operational readiness testing is all condition-based. So once we get through that successfully, and Mr. Leader and the general manager are comfortable, that the system is sufficient to begin pre-revenue activities, we will declare operational readiness. Once that happens, WMATA is responsible for care and custody of the infrastructure. The pre-revenue service, pre-revenue activity phase is defined as no longer than 90 days in the cooperative agreement. And that's the time where we'll be, training our station managers, familiarizing our train operators with the new terrain, and preparing the stations for our customers. And then the next milestone is opening, our revenue operations date. So we do not know yet, when substantial completion will happen. And because the operational readiness testing phase really, does not have a defined duration, it's all condition based. That's why it's challenging at times, to answer this question about, when. I think once we get to operational readiness date and WMATA is comfortable that the infrastructure, is safe and reliable, and we have a no longer than 90-day runway until revenue, I think then at that point we'll be much better positioned to start talking, about revenue. So, sir, that's all I had, pending any questions.
Thanks. Well, I do want to speak a little bit more specifically about the recent news reports and some discussion that the Airports Authority may not be able to meet the Labor Day substantial completion. So we were, I think, waiting to receive some more information from the Airports Authority. I don't know if we have received any more, but if you or the general manager could just address sort of exactly what has transpired in the last few weeks, and what we know about it so far, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, sir, absolutely. We had a shutdown over the last weekend in June. The intent of that shutdown was to complete tie-in activities between the Phase 1, the existing operating system, and the Phase 2, the new main line. There were specific tests that were not completed over that weekend that necessitated a further shutdown. We're currently working with MWA to schedule that. And I think I had mentioned to Mr. Letourneau previously that, obviously there's no concrete or cranes or anything like that out there. Right now, it's really an IT project as it relates to our signal infrastructure, the train control system. So once we get that final shutdown scheduled and we begin what's called level F testing, which is, the final run of, obviously we have trains out there right now. So we're working with MWA to, schedule that final outage, which is going to be, certainly a necessity to get into substantial completion. And then once we're there, we'll at that point we'll be, much closer to, I think, seeing MWA declare substantial completion. So I do know, sir, that MWA, if they haven't already, is planning to coordinate, with Loudon and Fairfax on some of these upcoming milestones.
But we don't have any specific information at this point that the substantial completion date needs to change as a result of the most recent testing, other than just a general awareness that there needs to be more testing and another shutdown.
Sir, there has not been a new substantial completion date published. I think inside the project, we're confident that it is going to move past Labor Day. But we just simply don't, MWA has not published, a date other than that. I believe as members of the board may be aware, there was a comment made that substantial completion will move to the fall. And that's really as specific as we're aware at this point.
Okay. The only other question I had, one thing that's not on this chart is the potential or review that will occur from the Metro Rail Safety Commission. Where exactly does that sort of fit in here, and what do we know about what sort of time frame that could be and how that may impact the project schedule?
Yes, sir. So the Washington Metropolitan, the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission does have oversight of MWA, so they are very engaged in the project. They have already issued what they refer to as a pre-revenue service report phase 1. After substantial completion, once we begin operational readiness testing, the WMSC will be very engaged in witnessing WMATA as we conduct those tests. And they intend to issue a phase 2 report but we don't know, obviously, what's going to be in it, or what specifically they'll be taking a look at, other than witnessing the various tests that we'll be carrying out.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll open it up to other members of the board. Mr. Bulger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my edification, Matt, with all this uncertainty, what does this mean for our budget for Silver Line Phase 2? Because I don't know what the estimate was for revenue, and I don't know. I thought we were using Labor Day as a benchmark, but it looks like we may not be on that course. So, Matt, what do you?
Yeah, I'll ask the general manager to address that. But Labor Day was always just a substantial completion date, not a revenue service date. So I think for the purpose of our budget this year, in this fiscal year, we were planning on revenue service sometime in the early winter time period. And I don't know that anything has changed there, but I'll let the general manager address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Paul Wiedefeld, General Manager. Yes, we had in the budget, as you recall, start up in January, as you said, in the winter time. Obviously, we would have to revisit that if this date were to slip some. We will see with that. But I think just to a larger point, if I may, what this has shown is putting out a date there is very, difficult when you have a complex project, particularly one that's had, several severe issues. So as we go and test what we believe, we all hope that the thing will be operating as designed. But if we run into something, we have to deal with it. And so that's exactly, I think, what happened when we did the testing at last month. And so we just have to keep that in mind, that this is a project that when it's substantial completion, the Airports Authority still, as Andy has said, still owns and basically controls the facility. But then we go in and we do test after test after test. We look at information. So I think we just have to keep that in mind as we go forward. We all want to get this thing open as quickly as possible, but we also want to make sure that we get what we all expect for the long term for this project.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Bulger?
So just so I'm up to speed, so we're expecting sometime in January for our budget purposes on our financials?
That was based on a substantial completion date of early September. As that adjusts, we may need to adjust the budget. If that continues to be sometime in September, then probably not. But if it were to slip, obviously we would want to push. We would not be operating in January if that was to be pushed further.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Rouse?
Yeah, I thank you for that, Mr. GM. I think naturally people want to attach dates to these, especially since it's been around. The project's been around for a very long time, and they're excited about it. But as you know, things very rarely go as planned when we get into pre-revenue testing and operations. And I know Ms. Infestato there knows I've spent most of my career telling people not to get too fixed on a date because one day could be very different from the next. And I've been on many test trains where you have 8 tests planned and you may only get through 1 because something strange happens. And the important thing is you figure out what happened and make sure the system is safe. And so this is a critical time for Metro, for MWA as well, to make sure everything that was done is working as intended. But saying that too, I didn't hear anything necessarily in what was brief that there was any major faults or issues with the system. So that's a good sign. I think that's a different discussion if we find that, because that's obviously something we'd want to know. But it's not unusual to have several tests planned and just not have the amount of time that you need. And so that's certainly, if that's the case and that's what we're in, that's understandable. But yeah, I think the key point here is there is time. You've got operational readiness, you've got pre-revenue activities, and I know we've talked about before, given the unique situation and the way this contract is with 3 parties involved, the more we can get done jointly in terms of validations during the operational readiness testing period, I think is what it would be. That leaves us a little more float on the pre-revenue activities. And so it's not all hands up in the air yet at this point. We still have a long way to go here. And the important thing is, again, if anything does significant come up, then that's the discussion we really need to have as to what happened and why. But at this point, it's normal for these types of projects.
Right. Mr. Spemberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 clarifying questions. First for the general manager, Mr. Wiedefeld. Just to be clear, so whenever this date happens, the contractors then turn it over to the airport authority. They do their work, and then it's turned over to WMATA to consider. Is that correct? I just want to make sure, because I think there's a little confusion in the public at times, thinking that this thing is just automatically going to be turned over to us, and that's it.
Right. So let me thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so it's a substantial completion date. The project does not get turned over to WMATA. This is a contractual term between the contractor and the Airports Authority. So basically, the Airports Authority says, yes, they've done everything they were supposed to do as a contractor, and now it's theirs. Then, as Andy's mentioned, then we get into this next stage, which is a lot of the testing of everything that was to have been done, right? To try to put it in plain English. And then once that is all tested and we go through maybe some iterations, as Devin just talked about, when you get to that point, we say, okay, well, all these things have tested out correctly. Now we move into the stage where we own it and we take care of it and we support it. And now we have this 90-day window to basically train, have everyone do all the things they have to do to prepare for opening day. So that's how this plays out. Andy or Teresa, any other thoughts on that?
No, sir. That was correct.
And Mr. Chair, my second question
Yes.
is Mr. Off. Andy, you mentioned the Safety Commission, and they've done this initial report, and now they're I guess going to be required or will be obligated to do a second report. Could you sort of give us a timeline? Are there any requirements that they do this before a specific time? When does that second report start? How are we to understand this, their role and the final stages here before it becomes operational?
Yes, sir. Frankly, it's not clear to me. I think, Teresa and I's goal is, to gain better clarity. I think, we have been, coordinating with them over the past year or so, to get some better clarity. I don't know. Teresa, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
I don't.
Okay.
Hold on, Teresa, you were unmuted and then you muted yourself again, so we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. There's a delay there. No, we're still working to seek clarity, but I do want to emphasize that we will not let the date drive the activities of the project. The execution of all of our safety certification activities will take place fully and thoroughly, and will adjust according to the results of all of that testing.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could, so
go ahead.
Andy and Teresa, so I really appreciate your efforts with this aspect of things. It's a little disheartening to hear it's been a year and not getting kind of clarity here because of the importance of this project to the system and to the region, really, in terms of getting people around. Hopefully, we'll have some clarity moving forward because I remember from the first phase, I think there were some last minute things, and so we want to make sure that everyone is on board and we have a schedule and a timeline here so we can deal with all this efficiently and effectively as possible. So thank you.
Sure.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Spedberg used the word required. So is the Metro Rail Safety Commission required to be doing this, or is this just something that they have kind of opted into doing?
So regulatorily, the state safety oversight, in this case, the WMSC, does oversee the safety certification process. The WMSC's recently revised program standard requires that they concur with the results of our safety certification and concur with each individual temporary use notice before we place the system into service.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I would just echo, though, what Mr. Spedberg said, which I really would call on the Metro Rail Safety Commission to be as collaborative as they can with WMATA and be as transparent as they can about the timeline, because there is a great deal of obviously public interest, financial pressure, all sorts of things associated with this. And I echo what you have said and what the chairman said about getting this right and safe. But I think we do need some transparency about kind of exactly how their process is going to work, how long it's going to take, those sorts of things, because we have to be able to plan when to actually plan to begin revenue service. And we're pretty late in the game at this point to have, in my view, to have this much uncertainty on that aspect of this. So hopefully that can be addressed shortly. Any other questions or comments from members of the board? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the update on this, and I'm sure we'll have more when we in our next few meetings. Moving on to our final item in the Safety and Operations Committee today, and that is the Safety Management System Path Forward Progress Update. Ms. Impastato?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to confirm that the members of the committee can see the presentation.
So far, so good.
Okay. Today's presentation will provide an update on Metro's implementation of a safety management system to improve the safety of our operations through proactive hazard mitigation strategies. As noted in prior briefings, the regulatory framework within which Metro operates began evolving in 2016 to require the implementation of a safety management system, or an SMS, which is a system of best practices to manage the safety of an operation. SMS has been implemented successfully in aviation, pipeline, and healthcare industries, resulting in dramatic increases in the safety of the system. WMATA developed an agency safety plan, or an ASP, to outline how the SMS is going to be built and implemented. Metro's ASP was approved by management, the board, the WMSC, all in 2020, and was certified with the FTA in December of last year. As noted in our earlier updates in 2021, we're now in the midst of a 3-year implementation effort. Traditional safety risk management is reactive, focused heavily on compliance and discipline as a means to ensure safety. System changes were often initiated by the result of an incident or a realized risk. In sharp contrast, SMS is proactive. While SMS retains the dedication to thorough and complete investigations of incidents, the focus shifts towards prevention through the identification of risks and activities to mitigate risk and avoid an incident from occurring altogether. SMS is data-driven, using analytics to predict the likelihood of an incident, and encourages a collaborative culture with all levels of the organization to identify, analyze, and address risk. Metro's SMS applies throughout the agency regardless of mode. As noted in prior briefings, our initial focus is to set the standard with the Rail Operations Control Center. We are working to develop tools and procedures in the ROC and then expand their use throughout the agency. But that's not to say that the balance of Metro's departments are not engaged in the SMS efforts. As part of the ASP, Metro has identified safety risk coordinators in all departments and has been working closely with those safety risk coordinators to build effective safety committees and to overall educate the organization regarding risk management theories and methods. To communicate our efforts in a visually trackable manner, Metro developed a 3-year SMS implementation roadmap. This roadmap depicts the 4 fundamental elements of a safety management system, as noted on the X and Y axis: safety policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. And notes specific milestones scheduled for completion in each calendar year. The roadmap is considered a dynamic document and will be reevaluated on an ongoing basis to ensure progress as we approach maturity. At the 3-year mark, we'll conduct a thorough assessment of the effectiveness of the SMS, and we'll then create an additional 3-year roadmap. I'm pleased to report that at the halfway point in the year, Metro has completed nearly half of the milestones set for 2021, with significant progress on the remaining program elements. In the balance of this presentation, I'll briefly review each SMS element and the significant accomplishments while identifying the next steps for the remainder of the year. In future board updates, I'll provide in-depth information on individual milestone efforts and our progress against the overall roadmap. With regard to the first pillar of our SMS safety policy, Metro's accomplishments including certifying the agency safety plan, developing our strategic roadmap, hiring a full-time SMS project manager, and conducting an organizational study and future state evaluation of the safety department to ensure that we are appropriately organized, staffed, and skilled to support the implementation of the SMS. With regard to next steps, we'll be updating and refreshing our agency safety plan. This will take place over the course of the next 2 months. And then we will be bringing the updated agency safety plan to the board in the fall for approval. We'll also be continuing the phased reorganization to include emergency preparedness efforts under the umbrella of the safety department and maturing the tactical action plans through integrating with a master project management tracker. With regard to safety risk management, as noted, we did hire the full-time SMS program manager in the ROC and launched a safety risk management pilot within the ROC. SAFE did take custodianship of the MSRPH, and we completed an audit of our voluntary safety reporting programs. Our next steps include maturing our risk management capabilities within the Operations Control Center, establishing additional Metro safety standards, and beginning to flow the safety risk management processes that we've built within the ROC to other groups, specifically to our supply chain management team, which is next in the phased implementation of the tools. Lastly, Metro is very proud to note that we're working to establish a partnership with MITRE, a not-for-profit operator of federally funded research and design centers that partners with industry and governmental organizations to improve safety, to assess and implement some of the recommendations with regard to our voluntary safety reporting programs. With regard to safety assurance, Metro has invested quite a bit of resources with regard to augmenting the safety investigations team. We've improved the investigation process, invested in additional statistical analytical tools, such as a biomathematical fatigue modeling application that will allow us to assess the likelihood of schedule-induced fatigue in a very quick, reproducible, and scientifically valid manner that will allow us to make determinations as to whether or not fatigue may have been causal or contributory in incidents. We've also improved our root cause analytics tools and have implemented training throughout the safety organization to ensure that our investigators are using the latest methods and tools available for investigations. We've established the Incident Management Officer, or IMO, role in the ROC and are continuing to mature the IMO function to assure that we are implementing best practices in emergency preparedness and emergency response. We've also completed the Herculean task of converting the safety department from paper-based documentation to the MetroDocs program, which is an electronic database that permits for control of documents and assuring appropriately configured documentation. We're working to advance these capabilities and to extend MetroDocs across the enterprise, which will give us additional opportunities to assure thorough, complete, and up-to-date SOPs and documents throughout Metro, but also will give us another data stream for us to take a look at in our analytics. Lastly, with regard to the safety promotion pillar of our SMS, we've trained ROC personnel with the initial SMS concepts. We've increased employee communications and have hired a full-time safety promotions program manager who will be overseeing the implementation of our safety communications program and communicating about our voluntary safety reporting programs. Most critically and importantly, Metro has applied just culture principles in the Rail Operations Control Center. Just culture principles represent a significant cultural shift from an emphasis on error identification and disciplinary action towards looking at systemic causes of incidents, looking beyond human error and looking at the environmental factors that enable the decision-making within your operation and scope of environment. Just culture principles have shown significant promise in the medical industry as well as in aviation in determining opportunities to identify organizational factors with mishap risk and to reduce the likelihood of repeat occurrences by making changes to the system instead of merely focusing on individual accountabilities for compliance. That's not to say that accountability and discipline and a just culture are mutually exclusive concepts. Quite the opposite. If in an investigation, an individual is found to willfully or recklessly make decisions that compromise safety, they will be met with appropriate sanction and/or disciplinary action. Our next steps with regard to safety promotion are to improve and implement a suite of SMS training, again, to progress our strategic partnership with MITRE to identify opportunities for us to increase our safety promotion in areas that may be statistically underserved, to report our voluntary safety reporting programs, and to expand internal and external communications. Specifically of note with regard to our voluntary safety reporting programs, that will be the focus of the next presentation that I give the board relative to SMS. Our voluntary safety reporting programs are one of the keystones upon which our safety management system is built. These programs enable, empower, and obligate ethically our employees to proactively identify and report safety risks, occurrences, and close call incidents. We will then, through the confines of those programs, be enabled to take action to address systemic conditions, any type of deficiencies or hazards, as well as to work with the individuals who were involved in an incident or a close call to identify causal factors and make changes to the system to prevent that from happening again. With regard to safety risk management, I'd like to give a quick overview of some of the efforts that we've undertaken within the ROC. As I noted earlier, the ROC was the first to launch, and the ROC underwent an iterative cycle with regard to safety risk management. It began with a brainstorming session. Of note, the safety risk management process that was employed in the ROC was remarkable in that it directly engaged and involved frontline employees. Traditional approaches to safety risk management were often actuarial in nature and were conducted separate and apart from the end users of operational processes. SMS requires that we engage at all levels throughout the organization, and we conducted brainstorming sessions with the control center, both ascending throughout the management chain, as well as engaging and involving critical stakeholders to identify and analyze and classify risks. Once we came up with a risk profile in the ROC, we then worked with those individuals to identify mitigations, ways to prevent the risk from being realized, to intervene, to detect, and or to disrupt any trends or cycles that we've seen with regard to mishap risk. It is important to note that all of these actions are going to be reviewed on an ongoing iterative basis. Risk mitigation is an exercise that's never truly complete. And with advances in technology, with changes in operational protocols, we will continue to conduct the safety risk management process. The output of the safety risk management process is a mitigation plan for each of the risks, and you'll track an updated future risk profile that really looks at the likelihood and potential severity of risks being realized in the operational environment. So to facilitate the gathering of risks and concerns outside of dedicated in-person brainstorming sessions, we put together a tool that went live in early June with ROC staff to submit risks, concerns, and issues that they have identified throughout the course of their duties. We're averaging 4 submissions per week, which is indicative of a healthy and robust risk management system. Of note, these risks that are being submitted are risks and concerns that either have been previously identified and are already being worked on with regard to mitigation, or they're newly realized risks that we are entering into the risk management portal and working with the team to identify ways to mitigate. The team is a new local safety committee within the ROC that now meets monthly, more frequently, of course, if needed. And the safety department has been supporting this local safety committee to assist in providing it with tools, methods, and structure to ensure that newly identified risks and risk assessments are logged and tracked, and to serve as an independent check and efficacy measurement of the mitigation efforts. Within this new local safety committee, there are escalation paths, including up to the executive safety committee if needed. This safety committee is comprised of representation from across the ROC, including the management chain, as well as individual controllers, and of course, the safety risk manager. With regard to the risks that have been identified in the ROC's risk management efforts, the top 6 risks closely aligned with many of the activities that are currently underway to address findings and issues that have been raised both by internal Metro evaluations as well as audits and evaluations conducted by the State Safety Oversight Agency, the WMSC. These risks include workload, complexity of procedures, fatigue policy, communications challenges, and document control. All of these risks have been incorporated into the ROC transformation program, and we were pleased to note that the controller assessment of risks aligned with the activities that we're taking and supported and validated those activities. We are verifying the mitigations with the control center staff to ensure that they're effective at reducing risk, but also that they're not creating any unintended consequences or new risks. This is an example of a mitigation plan that shows a multifaceted approach towards risk mitigation. As you can see in the detail, a number of the activities have been completed with the balance currently underway. Most of the activities for risk mitigation will be completed in accordance with our corrective action plans that have been submitted to the WMSC, with a timeline for completion in late 2021 and early 2022. Again, these activities are ongoing and iterative, and our risk mitigation efforts with the ROC transformation will never truly be finished. As we mitigate the risks downward, we'll always be looking for opportunities for continuous improvement. So with regard to activities in the ROC, next is to load all of this data into our hazard management software module, which will enable us to have the data in a location where we can access it for archival purposes, as well as to establish workflows for continued and ongoing review and update. Also, this will enable us to use in benchmarking activities internally and externally, and will enable us to conduct additional advanced analytics as we continue to populate that module with data. We are also working to establish an SMS dashboard to visualize the risk management successes and progress made with regard to the Rail Operations Control Center. Once we pilot the dashboard and get some feedback from end users and critical stakeholders, we'll use that dashboard as a template for dashboarding of SMS throughout the Metro organization. We're also continuing to formalize the safety risk management process and mature the committee functionalities while taking an eye towards improving the visibility of risk submission. Right now, we're beta testing an addition to the risk module that tracks submitted risks throughout every phase of the process and communicates openly with the submitter so that they have full transparent visibility of the dispositioning of the concern that they've raised. We're also working to develop metrics to measure the effectiveness of our efforts and to expand the implementation of these tools, metrics, dashboards, and procedures throughout the balance of the Metro organization. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions.
Thank you, Teresa, for the very comprehensive overview of all the work that's been taking place on the safety side, both in the ROC and throughout the system. Are there questions from members of the board on that presentation?
Hey, Matt, it's Tom.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Tom.
Chairman. Teresa, are we going to have a trained ROC controllers when the Silver Line eventually opens? Are we training them now, or how's that going to work?
Yes, sir. So we, as part of our rock transformation project and our corrective action plans, we have additional staff that are actually coming on board right now during this month. They will also be trained and qualified in Ops 4, which we are slated to open later this year. So we'll expand Ops 4, continue to train folks, and continue to staff up in accordance with our plan for the opening of the Silver Line. We'll be fully staffed at that point.
I thought I should ask that, Matt, since we don't want you to get trained to be a controller, you know.
And September 1st, it looked like, was the Ops 4 activation. Great. Mr. Rouse and then Ms. Babers.
Hearing, take them up on this.
Yeah, Teresa, I can't let you off this easily, but a couple observations. Slide 5, if you could go to it really quickly. Well, maybe not, given the way Teams is performing.
We have a wrecked.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those, it's easy to see this and kind of lose sight of some of the bigger parts of the program. And I think you know this, but, you know, like just, for example, the line there between safety assurance and safety risk management is really, it's actually very porous. And when you think about those two functions, it's really essential to have ties between programs and activities when those activities, and really the program as a whole, because it's just like the tendons in your body, you know, connecting your muscles and your bones. You can't have isolated activities, and especially when it comes to safety risk management, you want to make sure it's not just a static assessment one time, here's our hazards, here's our mitigations, and put it away. You need to always go back and say, are they working? What are the new hazards we found? What happened in this accident or in this incident? How does that relate to the hazards we've known that we have had? And, you know, was the mitigation in place? Did it work? Did it not work? That's really, if we get to where we want to be, you know, it's safety management, not safety milestones. And it is very easy with these programs, especially when you're implementing them for the first time, to really get so focused on the execution of these milestones and rolling out these programs that sometimes we lose sight of that. And it's just a word of caution there. I think you know that you've been doing this for a very long time as well as most of us here. And you know that our industry is not quite as caught up as aviation and others who've been using safety management for some time, but it's something that I've seen often is become so focused on just delivering the program, meeting the milestones, that we lose sight of the utility of some of those programs within the overall management aspect of the safety management performance program. So that's just one thing. And again, I am excited about the MITRE relationship. I think, you know, it's one thing we've struggled in this industry to have good data when it comes to close calls and that type of information. And so I'm excited to see where that progresses and anything we can do to help maybe roll that out to other agencies and make it a more broad program initiative. So thanks again.
Absolutely. And with regard to the interplay with safety risk management and safety assurance, part of the assessment that we conducted of the safety department was to make sure that we were structurally organized around achieving the ability to implement a strategy where safety risk management and safety assurance were completely interdependent and connected. So part of the activities that have been undertaken in some internal reorganization efforts within the safety department have been to establish functional relationships around safety risk management and safety assurance that assure two-way communication on a consistent basis with flow of information. The safety risk management module is connected from a database architecture perspective with the safety assurance activities. Both feed one another. So if there's an assessment conducted and mitigations are put in place, those mitigations will be fed to the safety assurance team for their action with regard to performance monitoring. And in complementing that, if the safety assurance team, through the conduct of an investigation or inspections, discovers a concern or issue, that is proactively fed to the safety risk management team for them to conduct the assessments and work to prescribe the mitigations. So we really, when building out the safety department to serve to support the implementation of SMS, identified that as a critical factor for success.
Yeah, thanks. And it's also a consistency issue and a continuity issue. Really, is what I meant to say there. Is because people come and go, and if that's not well tied together, then you get to this changeover of personnel, and they go, "Why are we doing this? What was the reason for doing this in the first place?" And so that tie and that making sure those programs have ties back to the overall program and onto other elements within your safety program is important. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Ms. Babers.
Yes, so Teresa, I would like to just thank you and your team for moving forward on the SMS program, which is extremely critical, that we were focusing on a safety program in a management system as we seek to get ridership back to the metro. And, hopefully Lynn and her team are going to be promoting exactly what we're doing as it relates to safety. You indicated in the next steps that you all were going to be developing the metrics for determining the effectiveness of the program. Do you have any kind of timeline? Because I definitely want to know what impact SMS is having in the ROC.
Absolutely. So the initial suite of metrics that we've already developed are primarily lagging indicators, indicators that show incident rates, things that have already happened. So we are tracking that. That is valuable with regard to monitoring performance. The additional metrics that we're currently working on developing are leading indicators, indicators that show your performance before it becomes outwardly obvious to a removed observer. So the new sorts of metrics that we're looking at are things like participation rates, things like the number of risks that are raised, the mean time for mitigations to be identified and implemented. We are looking to get that suite of metrics out within the calendar year as we're advancing our data analytics capability. And we're really looking to mature that over 22 and 23 as we continue to develop more ability to retain and acquire data that will then really supercharge and front load our ability to conduct additional analytics and identify some additional relationships that can best monitor the success of your safety program in advance of any type of mishap risk. So I would say 22 will really be the year that we probably hit the inflection point and become far more predictive than we are reactive in our metrics. But by the end of 21, we should have some new predictive metrics scoped out.
Okay, great. So I look forward to you all sharing those metrics with the board. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions on this specifically? Seeing none, just before we finish for the day, I just do want to acknowledge and ask you to comment to the extent that you can. There was a serious bus crash yesterday involving a WMATA bus. Obviously, my thoughts, and I'm sure everybody on the board's thoughts, are with the individuals who were injured in that crash. And we hope that they are doing well and recover. But is there anything you can tell us just in terms of where that stands in the investigation?
Absolutely. So MTPD as well as WMATA's SAFE team responded to the scene of the bus incident yesterday. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration also responded to the scene and conducted an initial on-site inspection of the bus, looked at the systems on the bus. At this point, FMCSA does not believe that there's any sort of mechanical issue with the bus. FMCSA did conduct tests and confirmed that the braking system on the bus was functional at the time of the incident. We are now collecting additional evidence, looking into data recording systems and determining what may have transpired within the incident. Of course, as the individuals that were involved in the incident convalesce, we're looking forward to the point where they are in a condition in which they can conduct an interview with us and give us a little bit more information. But with regard to the safety of the fleet, we have at this point determined that there does not appear to be any type of system abnormalities or failures, and we are confident in the safe operation of our bus fleet.
Thank you very much for that update. All right, are there any other comments, Mr. McMillan?
Just a quick question, Teresa. As the investigation progresses, when we have rail incidents, there are often the investigators often have access to a large amount of video footage. Would that be the case in this bus or generally in a bus-related investigation?
Our bus systems are equipped with drive cams, and we also have surveillance in a couple different angles on the bus. In this specific incident, the drive cam footage was not immediately accessible because the area where the drive cam device was mounted was damaged. So we are looking into securing that footage, but that will require some technical support. We do have some outward facing footage, and we're currently looking at that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? So I believe that this is our last board activity, Mr. Chairman, for today.
That is correct.
Okay. So if there is no further business to become before the committee, then the committee will stand adjourned. And this concludes today's Metro Board activities. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Take care.